I suppose the question of the evening, will the real leader of the Congress of the People please stand up? There was a dramatic punch-up in the middle of a press conference called by Mosiwe Lekota this afternoon. Let's take a look at that.
When I took a look at this, I realized that no, this was absolutely not correct. But by this time, the matter was already receiving the attention of the courts, including his signed affidavit. And the matter was about to go to the courts.
Let's bring in JJ Tabane. JJ, I mean, it's just astonishing. I was actually watching that at home, just keeping an eye on what Mosiwe Lekota had to say. It was all plodding along quite nicely, and it went chaotic. And it didn't end there, of course. It carried on.
On forever, yeah.
You know, there's something that worries me deeply, is when you are in a political party, you must use your words to create action. You mustn't use your fists. And it's just, you know, we've also seen disruptions in Parliament yesterday. But focusing on what's going on in COPE, I mean, is it clear, actually, who's in charge of COPE? And the reason I asked that, and I had to write this down to keep track of it. On Monday, the Deputy, William Adisha, said, we've suspended Mosiwe Lekota. He's frail, he's causing divisions, and there's also these allegations of corruption. Then I think later the same day, Mosiwe Lekota said, no, I'm just fine, and you cannot suspend me, I suspend you. And then he held a press conference today and all hell breaks loose. I mean, have you got any clarity on who's actually in charge of COPE this evening?
Yeah. Well, on Sunday, the eNCA, which is the highest decision-making body of COPE, that's where Mosiwe Lekota was suspended. And that's why William Adisha and the spokesperson, Dennis Bloom, were able to be confident enough to say, this is what has happened. But he wasn't
there. And they're saying that they invited him. Do we know if he was invited? Has he commented on that?
Yeah. This is what can called classical Lekota. You understand? I made a joke. I met him a few years after I left COPE.
Yeah, and let's be clear for our viewers. You spent 3 years being spokesperson for the newly formed COPE
I was actually part of the formation of COPE in 2008, 2009. And I became the advisor to the co-parliamentary leader, Reverend Dandala, just an excellent gentleman who was in a wrong place, right? And then I left in 2010. So this thing is a repeat of exactly what happened then, right? Mosiwe Lekota outmaneuvered. I made a joke with him when I bumped into him a year later to say, yeah, you really outmaneuvered us all, right? Because if Lekota and Shiloh got along, there would not have been a need to bring Reverend Dandala. Reverend Dandala was more of a compromise candidate, right, who were the elders of COPE, who will remain nameless for now, right, said, you guys are fighting, we're not interested, let's just put a proper presidential candidate. And at that time, they were contrasting Zuma with Dandala. So in the minds of people at COPE, it was obvious that we will win the elections because it was said, I mean, how can people go and vote for a Zuma who they already know is facing 700 charges and what you name it. So the fist fights then, and I want to call them that because here they've manifested after 12 years. But even there, it was chaos, court actions and what. It was all about power.
Who wants
Lekota and Chiloa saw themselves as a head of state because in our minds, when we were working there, we believed that this was a real split of the ANC and it's going to take power. Right? That's why they fight.
But why does William Adisha want Lekota out? Because he has power as the head of the party, albeit a very tiny one these days.
Well, they came around for a long time, or they took long to come around to realize that the common denominator of all the divisions, all the decline, all the chaos in COPE, and therefore the loss of electoral support was Lekota and his crew. You understand? It's just that they're only waking up now to say he must be suspended. What he has done by not arriving at that meeting, it means he knew that they wanted to suspend him because they've been wanting to suspend him for a long time. He's been absent without leave from Parliament for months. I mean, this whole COVID thing helped him to just be absent.
We know he's been ill, even though he says he's fine.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, and this is a very serious allegation, the allegations that he's involved in corruption. He was vehement. He said there's absolutely no way. Bring the evidence, which is a good point. Bring the evidence. Could you believe that of him? Because I remember when he was Free State Premier, we're talking over 20 years ago, interviewing him when he was still in the ANC. And he came across as a man, a very honest man. Now, maybe I'm naive, but I mean, would you say that any politician really could be tempted?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I wouldn't put too much money, right, on those allegations. And that's not the main issue. The main issue is that here you've got a fellow who can't get along unless it is his way. He's a chaotic chap. In fact, most of us who joined COPE, if we knew how he operated, we would have stayed far away from it, right? And I'm not saying that he was the only person who caused the collapse, but if you put him next to Mbazima Shilowa, Mbazima Shilowa would come out as a saint in as far as the collapse of COPE was concerned, you know. Just give you an example. I mean, he talked a lot about, you know, the fact that he doesn't want the positions, right? He's not in COPE for positions, right? This is what was in the context of when Dandala came, and, you know, he was grumpy and sulking and not cooperating with him. And then what happened? Once the COPE got 36 seats, he wanted to go to Parliament to be the leader of COPE in Parliament. But we told him no. But Dandala is the leader of COPE in Parliament. He's the one who was a presidential candidate. You said you don't want position, so please go and stay at the head office. And between that time that COPE was in opposition and the time that Dandala left, he did everything to frustrate him, to make sure that eventually he then goes to Parliament and becomes the leader of COPE in Parliament. In contrast to what he was always been saying about positions. So it's manifesting after 12 years that he would rather this thing dies, you know, than he leaves. I mean, surely it's the time for him to leave. I mean,
and I mean, if we look
with
back,
all indications.
We were looking at the figures, me and the team. 2009, COPE got 1.3 million votes, which was 7.4% of the national vote. 2019, less than 50,000 votes. It's just over 0.25%. So, you know, I think what's interesting, though, and this is something Dennis Bloom referred to. Dennis Bloom, of course, is with William Madisha, saying that Mosiuoa Lekota should go. He's saying that it's also about these coalitions at local level. He mentioned Nozipho Kalipa in Ekurhuleni. So what is the local government dynamic that's happening?
Okay, first of all, the 1.3 million to 50 is a clear obliteration. Right? So essentially, we are fighting over crumbs. We are fighting over 2 seats in Parliament. We're fighting over crumbs. We don't even know whether in the next round of elections you'll even get 1 seat. But what happened at local government? Let's forget about Ekurhuleni. Let's talk Joburg. That's on the news tonight, right? The chair of chairs, first of all, is a chairperson of all chairpersons. Belongs to a COPE lady, they're Colleen Makubele in Joburg. They've got 1 seat in the whole metro. Of hundreds of seats, they've got 1 seat. They take one of the most important positions there. Now they want to now take that person and make them the speaker. So this thing about the speaker being removed is not innocent, right? So imagine that kind of chaos now being transported into the biggest city in Africa. Right?
So if they get rid of Vasco da Gama, there's a push to get a COPE speaker
Exactly,
in.
so that person now is in power, they are in charge of resources.
You're sort of suggesting that the only chaotic person is Mosiuoa Lekota. I mean, is everyone else in the party chaotic? Or you're just saying there's a general A of chaos?
Person. You know, in Africa, there's something called the big man syndrome. How does this work? So there's one big man and people surrounding him, blinding him to the reality. You know, the whole thing about the emperor's...
The emperor's new clothes,
right?
This
is what happened with Zuma. Zuma was in power for 9 years. Do you think that the people in the NEC don't have brains? Except that he was a big man, surrounded himself with people who said to him, you are wonderful, you are a radical economic transformer, and all the nonsense, which was the opposite of what he did there. Same with Mbeki. With all the respect we have for Mbeki, he stood, for a third term because he was saying, people around him said, oh, the branches want to, please go ahead.
Got to ask one last question, because the role of the smaller parties as we head to 2024, if the ANC drops below 50, could be really important in making or breaking coalitions. Now, I want to ask you if what we saw today in Cope and the general malaise in Cope, is it unfair to judge other smaller political parties on what Cope has done? Would you say they're the exception or not?
They're not the exception. All you have to look, you must look at the trajectory of opposition parties in the last 30 years, right? Starting with UDM. Do you remember how big UDM was? The whole idea of, whites and blacks in one party and so on, Rolf Meyer and Holomisa, etc. That is, they are left with 2 seats in parliament, right? PAC, I don't even know where they are. PAC, in fact, was interesting today when they were talking about who's the real president and so on. I had the misfortune of hosting a wrong PAC leader on my show, and then the other said, no, we must bring the right one, and the following week, Azapo, is a boutique. I think they should try and remain an intellectual boutique somewhere. They're not going to govern at any. So you've got all these small parties that started with big hope and big dreams, right? EFF has stagnated at around 10%.
Yeah.
They were the most hopeful of the lot, of all these parties and so. But they're not going to govern at 10%, right? So you are right that, therefore, them collectively are going to, can end up governing us if the ANC goes below 50%. And so you need them to actually at least be organized.
I mean, not only get on with each other, other political parties, but within their own political parties.
Within the, but the important point here, Sally, is that our country can ill afford a one-party state mentality, right? Therefore, opposition parties have to get their act together. We cannot tire to create alternatives. Look at Action SA. I mean, they are literally a few months old, and they made a good showing in the Joburg Metro. Nothing stops them from making a good showing nationally. So we cannot give up, right? The fact that Cope was a good idea, badly executed, only sort of sparked, other people saying maybe we can also form our own parties. And they don't always go well. I mean, look at what happened to Ahang. Right?
Oh, yes. I'd forgotten about Ahang.
Exactly.
Well, exactly.
You see.
Thank you so much for chatting to us. Yeah. What's coming up in your show tonight, very briefly?
Madisha is coming through, and I'll be also having analyst Prince Mashele, as well as Anelem. Anelem Dar used to be the youth leader of COPE. So we're carrying on with the news.
No fist fights, please. Can we just keep it? No fist fights. Promise me.
No, it's going to be fun. Madisha is a very calm fellow. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. We look forward to that coming up at 8 o'clock. That, of course, is political analyst and host of Power to Truth, Professor JJ Tabane. That his show is on at 8 o'clock tonight. Stay with us here on SA Tonight.